I will at least start you off here today. I'm just a lawyer in that regard. I am not a member of this body. I am just trying to get our organizational meeting going on for the first opportunity for the Sports Authority of the County of Hamilton and the City of Chattanooga to meet today. And at this point in time, I believe we have a sheet that is going around. It is a waiver sheet showing that we do have at this point in time a quorum for this meeting. This is a 7-member board under state law. And because of the number of folks, you all have 5 members in attendance this morning, we're going to have our initial organizational meeting. And for the first thing you need to do in your initial organizational meeting would be to elect a chair pro tem. I think we've got a number of folks politically that would like to speak to you at the beginning of this meeting. You can either do that before you elect a chair pro tem, or you can do it now, however you'd like to do that. Does anybody have any desires to hear from a mayor of the city and the county?
Yes.
Fair enough.
Well, thank you very much, Councilor Noblett, and thanks to you guys. This is a little formal, for a group of this size, but I want to, give this occasion the gravity it deserves. So thank you all for bringing here and bringing your experience and your talent and your passion for Chattanooga to this board. Each of you is serving in a critical role here for the future of this community. You're here today because we're finally ready to begin the transformation of our long neglected Western Gateway. And it starts with the construction of the development's anchor, Chattanooga's new multi-use stadium. I think you're all aware at this point of all the work that went to getting us to this point. There have been no less than 8 public studies on the site over the last 10 years, along with multiple community meetings, months of presentations and deliberations with our city and county legislators, and of course, the countless hours of hard work and careful planning by all the talented folks working on this project, including many of you. It's been a true labor of love, honestly, and I want to take a moment to briefly acknowledge the many partners who came together to help us move this project forward. Our state delegation, our city council and our county commission, Perimeter Properties, Hardball Capital, and the Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce have all contributed their valuable time and expertise to this work. And most of all, I want to recognize my closest partner and friend, Mayor Jim Coppinger, who's here with us today, whose steadfast leadership and vision really made all this possible prior to me even considering becoming the mayor of the city of Chattanooga. Now, with all the years of starts and stops on this project finally behind us, it's time to look ahead to what's next. And with your leadership, we are ready to do that and take the first tangible step in creating a thriving new community that will increase prosperity and quality of life in our city for generations to come. Construction of the stadium will catalyze new affordable housing, new commercial space for small business, new living wage jobs, and new public green spaces and trails for our residents. This growth will generate tens of millions of dollars in new tax revenue and improve our local schools and infrastructure funding that simply would not exist otherwise if it weren't for this project. It will also open up new opportunity for our South Broad neighborhoods. Residents will have new pathways to jobs and skill building programs as part of a community benefits agreement being drawn up with Hardball Capital and the developers. And creation of the Alton Park Connector will finally connect a historic Chattanooga neighborhood to the Riverwalk for the very first time. In short, we're taking a huge leap forward towards becoming one Chattanooga, and with that, a huge leap forward towards becoming the best city in the country. I truly believe this project has the potential to fundamentally shift our trajectory upward and forward into a new era of investment and inclusive growth unlike any we've ever seen. An era where, for the very first time, all Chattanoogans will have an opportunity to enjoy the prosperity and quality of life our city offers. With such important work in front of you, it should come as no surprise that time is of the essence. In just a few weeks since we received City Council and County Commission approval of the project, we're seeing a marked increase in developer interest. Not only is there more than $170 million in development planned for housing and office buildings around the stadium, master developer Jim Irwin and his partners are putting together a $650 million investment fund for the site. And Mr. Irwin is moving full steam ahead on creating a site plan that will turn our South Broad district into one of the most epic, beautiful riverfront developments in the country. Simply said, there's an incredible amount of new growth and development within reach for our city. And that's why it's so important for this board to work diligently and efficiently to finalize a lease agreement with the Lookouts and issue the bonds needed to break ground on the stadium while interest is ripe. After decades of wasted potential with this site, we just don't have time to lose. Our Western Gateway has been a post-industrial wasteland for far too long, and it's time for our community to finally experience the wealth of benefits that will come with its revitalization. So it's time to get rolling. I'll close with this. When we look back on this project and the work of this board years from now, I am confident that we will see this as the inflection point of our community's ability to fully realize Chattanooga's potential. We are turning a historic corner with this project, and by serving on this board, you are rising to this pivotal moment with us. It's an incredibly exciting time for our city and our county, and I cannot thank you enough for joining in this work and in the vision for our future. So thank you very much. With that, I will turn it over to Mayor Coppinger.
Thank you, Mayor Kelly. And again, I guess for the record, I'll statement, I'm Jim Coppinger, Hamilton County Mayor. What honor it is to be here with you today to see this come to fruition. And I want to say to everyone that's listening, and for the record, that there's not been a better partner to work with on this particular project than the city mayor, Tim Kelly. You know, his vision, and as you just heard, how articulate he is. He's every bit as good in behind closed doors in negotiations. So the city has a lot of things to look forward to as I'm a city resident as well as a county resident. So, you know, how do we get here? I mean, this is a project that's been talked about, as Mayor Kelly mentioned, in 7 or 8 different times. There's been meetings, a lot of discussions about this particular piece of property. And there's a couple other people that I wanted to recognize that a little bit more personal, which is Gary Chase and Premier Properties for keeping this gateway open. I remember when I came in as mayor in 2011, in 2012, sat down with Gary Chase, and he said back then, you know, I want this to be something the city and the county can be really proud of. And so you fast forward to this committee and how important this committee is to us, as you heard all of these things that were, you know, articulated so well by Mayor Kelly about where we're going in the future with this particular project. And you're going to have a lot to say about that. And obviously, you know, you were chosen because of your successes and because of your abilities to make good, sound decisions. And I think that's all that the citizens of this city and this county expect. Again, there's going to be multiple opportunities there as it relates to not only the stadium, but the economic development. But when we talk about the stadium, as you've probably heard so many times, what you hear is the discussion about the lookouts in the ballpark. But what really intrigues me about that is the fact that it's going to be an event stadium, right? So being an event stadium, being able to have events there 365 days a year, hopefully not in the immediate future, we want it as soon as it's built. But again, it presents a lot of opportunities as a venue that we don't have currently because the particular size is going to be. So a lot of that is going to be up to this committee with their ideas and different things that they will propose. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about the leadership of this committee and what it means to our county and what it means to our city. And although I'm going to be exiting stage right in the next 48 hours, I'm going to be just as excited about it as a recovering politician as I have been to have been involved with this for over a decade. If you really want to stop and think about how long it's been and how long this project's been in the works, to be able to find the right master developer, to find the right people and the right leadership from both the city council, the county commission, and certainly Mayor Kelly's leadership to be able to make this come to reality. It's a pretty phenomenal thing and a great opportunity for everybody else that's looking in from outside that may want to, again, be attracted by what we're doing here and choose to bring their businesses here or to live here because there's just going to be a tremendous amount of opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I wish you the best of luck. I really do. I know I've got a lot of confidence in this board, and I know great things are going to happen at that particular site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. At this point in time, you gentlemen and lady, need to decide who you want to be your chair to start this meeting. At this point in time, we need to have an election for a chair pro tem to call the meeting to order. And the business of the chair pro tem will simply be to conduct an election for the officers. And it may be your chance to appoint someone that is here or not here for this meeting to be an officer of this corporation. So at this point in time, I guess we'll open the agenda to see, is there anyone that has a desire to chair this meeting as a chair pro tem to conduct the election?
You.
I'm happy to.
All right, sir. At this point in time, would you like me to pass you the gavel to keep them in order?
I think you can keep the gavel.
Keep the gavel down. All right. At this point in time, I would ask you to just call the meeting to order here and to establish that, yes, we do have a quorum for this meeting, this 7-member board.
Sure. Happy to call the meeting to order, and we do have a quorum of the seven-member board.
Yes, sir. And the first item of business, I guess, for today would be the election of officers for this board. And we're going to need to have a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary treasurer. And I guess on your end of it here, if you want to conduct that by a ballot process, or if you want to just have someone to volunteer or to give name suggestions for the item of chair first.
Why don't we just give names and suggestions? Would anyone like to volunteer? Do we draw straws?
You can do that, or you could choose to elect the chair pro tem by acclamation at this point, however you wish.
I'm happy to be the chairman.
Vote approved. All right. Looks like you got a motion and a second. Is everyone in order, in agreement with the chair?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So we now have a position for vice chair, and I guess it's open for nominations at this point.
Are you interested? You.
Rudolph, would you like to be vice chair?
Yes.
So at this point in time, do you have a second for the selection of vice chair?
Second.
Second.
You have two.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. You got it. You're in business, Mr. Foster. Next, we need a secretary treasurer for this group. Who would like to be the secretary treasurer?
You want to nominate someone not here?
You got two choices here in that regard.
That's it. Who's that? Brandon?
Let's see, we got Randy is not here, and we have Miss Weeks. It's not here.
Against, you want to be six?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, Edna Varner.
Okay.
Did you want to do it?
No, so then you got it. I'll
Okay.
second.
So we got a motion and a second for Ms. Varner. All in favor?
Aye.
That's great.
All right. You now have 3 officers for this corporation. Yes, we should let you know, I guess, on the item number 4 on your agenda this morning is a resolution authorizing and ratifying the charter of the Sports Authority of the County of Hamilton and the City of Chattanooga. I'll let you as chair to read that for the record here and get ourselves going.
So what document is that?
On your agenda, it is item 4. Just on the top.
Resolution authorizing and ratifying the charter of the Sports Authority of the County of Hamilton and the City of Chattanooga. And that's
That's your first attachment, I believe, in there, showing the Secretary of State has actually accepted your charter as a nonprofit corporation here, and it is on file as of August 16th of 2022.
let me just see if I can find it. Sorry.
Second page on the back.
Really didn't give you the first page. I'm sorry. It's on the back.
Would you like me to just read Article 4 or the entire charter?
Really, all you need to do is ratify that this is your charter and that y'all approve this being filed with the Secretary of State. Since we were doing all that before you had your first meeting.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Well, I can ratify along with the members of the commission that this is the charter.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So you need to have a motion and second to pass that resolution.
So move.
All right,
Second.
all right, sir. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, you are officially in business here and on file with the state of Tennessee at this point in time. Next, we need to have bylaws adopted by this body. I believe that is your item number 5. Just, you can just read the initial resolution and then we'll have approval by the body.
Sure. Be it resolved that it hereby authorizing the approval of the bylaws of the Sports Authority of the County of Hamilton, and the City of Chattanooga.
The bylaws are attached. There's some paper missing.
And ask for a motion to approve. Is that
Yes.
so? So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
So you now have your charter and your bylaws approved. The next item of business on your agenda is the 4 things here on policies for this board. There's a public input policy, an ethics policy, a debt management policy, and a public records policy. And I believe that can be discussed somewhat with folks that prepared that with the departments here for the city and Mr. Manitow, if you wish.
Great. And where's Mr. Manitow?
There's Mr. Manitow, and I don't see Jermaine. Where did Jermaine go?
And I guess one question, have we been asked to disclose any conflicts, potential conflicts? Do the commission members need to do that?
I would be glad to at least tell you what the ethics policy for the city is, and that's being adopted by this body. There is a concern, at least, as to what might be a personal, financial ownership or employment interest anytime you're involved in public boards here for the city. And normally, the city of Chattanooga requires anyone, if you're going to have a vote where you might have some sort of personal interest involved, to disclose that before you make a vote. And if it is either a voting matter or a non-voting matter, you should need to at least disclose that. And you may want to recuse yourself from the vote if it's too close. So I will try to guide you in connection with that based upon the state law requirements for ethics here in Tennessee. It involves also any financial ownership or employment interest of your children or your spouse in connection with these matters as well. And this is a standard requirement for any public entity here in Tennessee. And if you're working for a company that you might be directing benefits to, that's another concern. So I'll try to give you that information. There are provisions under the policy here that is under the state law. You can't accept gratuities to get you to vote in a certain way either. So you can't be accepting something. If you get into a situation where you have a concern about that, please contact an attorney. I will be glad to give you advice or any other attorney regarding the statutory requirements on here. And if a violation occurs, then it'll have to be dealt with as a violation of the action of the board, and it could result in some problem with the board's decision-making in the process. So that's why we want to make sure we've got that resolved before you make a vote. And beyond that, there are debt issuance policies on here that I thought we might want to have at least Mr. Manitow discuss a little bit with them here under the state statute as well.
Please.
We're going to be issuing bonds, I believe, at this body. That's one of the concerns for that debt issuance policy. Is that correct?
Yes, it's certainly expected that that will happen. It's used to be a lot easier to form a new entity, but now the state dictates that you have public records policy and a debt management policy if you expect to issue debt. The ethics policy is Phil did a great job. I really don't have anything to add to that. And then if you we suggest you do not have to have the public forum policy, but we found it to be really helpful for public entities to establish procedures. Otherwise, you're gonna make a big decision. You'll have 100 people here wanting to talk, and you'll have no methodology on how to handle this. And so this gives you some guidance. You can always be, if you want to hear from 20 people instead of 3 on each side, you can always do that. But it gives you, under First Amendment principles, what's called, time and constraint limitations that, and I don't know if you do something similar at city council or something to where you limit the time. I assume you do to do that. So that one is not required, just advisable. The debt management policy is required if you're going to issue debt. And it's basically, this is a pretty bare bones policy because we expect fixed rate bonds, long-term at this point. And so no fancy derivative products or things like that. And so this is a sort of vanilla debt management policy to comply with state law. And then Phil did a great job on the ethics. It's usually, as he said, it usually comes to a vote. We do have a provision there for annual certification that you've got these, and that you're not aware of any violations. So that's part of it. Glad to answer any questions about any of these. So.
At least as the public input policy, debt management policy, public records policy, these are the items that are being considered, at least on this resolution. These are implicit and required under Tennessee law to have access to public records. We are very familiar with that in our office because one of the folks in my office is the public records person that gives out all the records for the city. We have got a requirement, at least in here, that anything that is made as a request for public records request to come to my attention, or Ms. Meacham, who is the public records person in the city attorney's office, to provide information. There's a requirement for how inspection can occur. There's actually a public records request form that is included in this documentation that you have here, and an estimated cost form that Ms. Meacham does regularly for the city. So that's the reason we had that drawn up before the meeting, if that's acceptable to this body.
Sounds good.
I believe those are the 4 policies at least we're asked to look at and to consider adoption of here at this meeting.
Okay, so then I'd like to motion to authorize the approval of the 4 policies, I guess, the public input policy, the ethics policy, debt management policy, and public records policy.
Yes, sir.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
All right. You're churning like a board. That's good. Okay. The next item on here, there's a discussion of the director's roles and responsibilities that I presume, are you going to tell us something about that, what you want them to do in connection with the matters coming up on here, Mr. Manitow?
We had that on there just really in case you all had questions. I think the really important point that I always like to make at this sort of juncture is that state law is really clear that you have very broad protections from serving on this board. Obviously, you have no personal liabilities for any debt the board incurs. We will put that in bold letters in any documents, but it's already baked into state law. And as Mr. Nobbett will share with you as well, you also have very broad protections under sovereign immunity laws and under general nonprofit corporation laws in Tennessee that they give you very, very broad protection for serving on this board. And I know that that's often the first question I get is like, hey, is this a governmental entity? Yes, this is a Tennessee law calls you a public nonprofit corporation. And so, but you are truly a governmental entity that we don't seek 501c3 status for you because you are what's called a Section 115 entity, which means you're a governmental entity for Internal Revenue Service purposes. Bonds that you issue can be tax exempt directly. You don't have to go like through the IDB or something like that. And you're going to play a really key role, as the mayor said, in this project. There's similar boards. We just created one in Knoxville, but we also have worked extensively, as you might guess. The most active board in the state has been obviously the Sports Authority for Metro Nashville, who's financed all their major league as well as their AAA sound stadium there. And so And then they've used the Sports Authority to some extent in Memphis for their FedEx Forum. They've also used their IDB a little bit more for different reasons, but you are there. You, as you may know, there's already an existing city IDB, but because of the joint effort here, we're going to talk about the interlocal agreement here in a minute of the city and the county. It was appropriate, I think, to have the consensus was appropriate, and I think it's certainly the right decision to have both, the city and the county approve you all as members of this board, and that you're acting for the benefit of both the city and the county here, given that they're both effectively standing behind the debt to the extent necessary. So glad to answer any questions about your roles, but we certainly can. If you have questions, you might say, well, who is this guy? By the way, I should have introduced myself. I'm primarily a bond lawyer. I help people finance things, but I work with entities like this board a lot, and I'm working on very similar. Obviously, our stadium. I work for a very big law firm. We have a small branch office in Knoxville. I just happen to live in Knoxville. I like living in a city like you all do, and that I don't have to be stuck in traffic for hours on end. So it's easy for me to hop down here, and so I hope to be working with you all on this project over the next year or so. We're moving a lot faster than we moved in Knoxville. We've been doing that for almost 2 years, and our Sports Authority just had its first anniversary. I noticed because we got our annual report requirement. So glad to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Mamatoff has been very helpful on developing our policies that we've got on here. We have worked together with them in that regard to try to make sure we've got our ethics policies, our debt management policies, and our public records policies in order here in the same manner that they're doing in other sports authorities throughout the state. And the good thing about your roles and responsibilities, as long as you follow your policies that you have involved here and do not engage in any personal conflict type things under the ethics policy, that under state law, you should be protected from any liability in that regard. So that's an important part of your roles and responsibilities of this board. Try to do things in a public meeting process as much as possible. We're dealing with it right now. We will have resolutions and ratifications occurring in these public meetings that will be involving the bond issuances that may be expected in the future. And hopefully in a little bit, they'll give us some information about the process for any bond issuances and the stadium project that's going on for future meeting dates. As you'll notice by your revisions about when you normally meet, typically these meetings only occur about once a year on that if they talk about these matters. We have a lot of things that are moving pretty quickly right now that may require more meetings than that. I hope they told you that somewhat whenever they asked you to join, but that is ongoing here at this point in time. And maybe we can get some information from Jermaine about the schedule and the timing of future meeting dates.
Hello, I am Jermaine Freeman. I serve as Senior Advisor to Mayor Tim Kelly for the City of Chattanooga for Economic Opportunities. So in my role, things that are fall under the purview of economic development and workforce development fall under my purview. You all will have the ability to sort of set the schedule for your regular meeting schedule. We will ask that you all have in this initial stage a few sort of more frequent meetings so that we can continue the process of trying to get the lease approved with the Chattanooga Lookouts, as well as help us to get to a bond issuance point. So we are asking that, and I think that Maria Manala from our city attorney's office has reached out to you about doing a second meeting in approximately 2 weeks from today on September the 13th. I think that's 2 weeks from today. And so I think that is the next meeting that we are hoping to have. It would be at the same location at the same time. And then I think after that, we obviously want to work with you, specifically with the chair, to make sure that we can have a meeting schedule that makes sense for the board. And with that, I'll take any questions if you have any questions.
Any timing on any bond issuances that might be necessary?
Sure. So, and I'll let our Brent Goldberg, the city CFO, chime in here. But I think we obviously would like to get to a bond issuance within the next few months. So before the end of the year. And so there obviously that is a process, and it'll take a little bit of time to do that. But I think we would like to get to an initial bond issuance within the next 3 months, I think.
In addition to a lease being signed with Hardball Capital, what else needs to be accomplished before that bond is issued?
That's a good question. I was going to cover that in my slides, but so there are a couple of big things that will come before the board. So in addition to the lease agreement with the Lookouts and the bond issuance, you all would also be overseeing the donation of property that would come into your ownership. So you all, as the Sports Authority, would be taking ownership of property that has been pledged to you from the current property owners, which include Perimeter Properties. They own they own portions of property on the old Wheelan Foundry U.S. Pipe site, and they have pledged to donate the acreage necessary to build the stadium. And so that donation would come over to you all. So you all will obviously have to approve that donation. And then in addition, as we obviously it will take a few months for us to get to a bond issuance. However, we don't want to lose any momentum or sort of stop work in that time frame. So over the next few months, we would like to begin doing some initial site work in the area, which would include, geothermal work and some of the just initial site work that's involved before construction. And so an agreement that will sort of outline what that process would look like would also come before you all. Those are pretty much the big items. So the lease, the donation of the land, the acceptance of that donation, an agreement with the city to begin some additional site work that needs to happen, sort of pre-work, and then the bond issuance. Those are really the big things. There may be some other smaller things that come along as well, but those are really the big items for you to think about. Yes, sir.
Do you have any questions for the CFO of the city on the bond?
Well, I might as well just introduce myself and add on a little bit. I'm Brent Goldberg, CFO for the city of Chattanooga. And I don't know if Jermaine mentioned this, but essentially, the city of Chattanooga staff will be staffing this board. So the city of Chattanooga accounting staff will do all the accounting. Jermaine and I will routinely be staff present to do all the work that needs to be done for the Sports Authority on a day-to-day basis versus the governance that you all are providing. And just to, Jermaine mentioned we want to get these bonds issued in a few months. We would likely shoot for early December for issuance and close in early January. That would allow us to get everything going for groundbreaking by April, which would allow us to open the new stadium in April of 2025. So that is our goal in terms of timing. And as Jermaine mentioned, we do want to get to work as soon as possible on some of the site work that needs to be done, which would, require us for the city to pay for some of those costs up front and get reimbursed from the bonds once they are issued. So, I don't think I have anything else to add. And Jermaine and I, of course, have have a presentation to go through to give you all the same information that we've presented to the IDB boards as well as city council and county commission.
Who's responsible for the design and getting the permitting and so forth? Because that's a pretty aggressive schedule. I'm sure design has already started.
Yep. You want to talk about that, or Mark?
You want
Responsible for
Yeah,
design?
no, we can do it together, but it is your stadium. And so state law is silent on your procurement processes. Unlike Chattanooga, which I'm sure has it built into its charter and its probably its ordinances in the county, which is governed by a state procurement process. You don't have that. You're much like an industrial development board, I think that you have a lot. Despite that, the process will be very transparent, but certainly going to be on the design aspect of it. MLB has a lot of input on this. And so your team here, as you probably know, the owner has built other stadiums. I'm sure he will bring a lot of the typical players to the table on the design side. Populous tends to have a hand in it. They seem to have sort of the stadium niche in the country, but there's also certainly going to be local architects and stuff involved. But the actual procurement of construction, that was going to be what I was going to, it was funny when you asked that question. I was going to say, that's your other really big thing, is that we will need to go. I mean, Brent and I had talked, and he's sort of like, we need to look at the best option for a project of this nature. It may be a design build type option instead of a, traditional, design bid build sort of thing, which, given the unique nature of the stadium, as we found that we had to do a lot of value engineering given in Knoxville, given rising construction costs. And so it's probably going to be a little bit different process than traditional public procurement, but still transparent and try to get obviously the best pricing possible. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and so we would not necessarily use city procurement rules. I think this board needs to decide what procurement they would want to do. We obviously want to do public bids. As Mark mentioned, design build would be preferable for this type of project, similar to some other projects we've done through the IDB, which utilize the design build process. They have one going right now related to wastewater. That is just it's in the best interest of the IDB, the city, and the county to use that process. Again, just to reiterate what Mark said, the owner of the lookouts, as well as the master developer that we've hired, that the property owner has hired to develop the property, they both have experience with building stadiums, especially Major League Baseball compliant stadiums. So they will certainly be part of the process and how it gets designed. But there will be a process to determine who is hired to design and build the stadium. And we'll get to that, of course, as we meet in the future. The other thing I will mention, similar to what we've done with other very large projects that are public projects, the city's Public Works Department will act as a project manager, similar to what they did for Enterprise South when we built out Enterprise South, which became the home of Volkswagen. So we do have sufficient experience on staff within the Public Works Department, especially within our engineering division, to manage a project of this size, and make sure that we're keeping everything compliant, make sure that we are going through the processes that we need to do, and make sure that we are acting in the best interest of the public.
Great, thank you.
They at least had down a proposed stadium project discussion. I didn't know if y'all had a presentation you were wanting to show to the board.
Yes, obviously, we've talked a lot about the stadium, but it would probably be helpful for our board members to actually see some of the presentations that have been shown to the industrial development boards for both the city of Chattanooga and Hamilton County, as well as the Hamilton County Commission and the Chattanooga City Council. So this is what you see on your screens is sort of an early rendering of what the stadium could look like over in the South Broad District area. Many of you may recognize, kind of on the right side of your screen, that large structure that is sort of over the grandstand. That structure exists today on the Wheel and Foundry site, and I'll show you that later in our slides. But obviously, Jim Irwin, who is the master developer for the site, would really like to see some adaptive reuse of what's existing there, and then also see the stadium sort of really interwoven with the Riverwalk to create a nice public space. But we'll talk about that here more momentarily. As we've sort of gone over this, but now that the city of Chattanooga and Hamilton County have approved plans to move forward with this stadium, you all are the new city-county sports authority, and you all will oversee the management of the stadium on behalf of both the city of Chattanooga and Hamilton County, as both the city and the county have a financial stake through committing TIF financing to fund the stadium. In the coming weeks and months, you will be asked to approve the lease of the lookouts, as I mentioned before, as well as accept a donation of land from the current property owners, as well as approve agreements to begin initial site work for preparation for construction, and then you will be asked to issue bonds. Today, the agreement that you will be asked to vote on is the interlocal agreement, which has already been approved and signed by the county and the city, signed by both County Mayor Jim Coppinger and City Mayor Tim Kelly. This is the agreement that basically commits the city and the county to backstopping any debt that is not covered through TIF financing for the cost of the stadium, so that cost does not fall on the sports authority. this is sort of our timeline of where we've been. So we've done a lot of meetings, and so I didn't have room to cover every meeting, but this process really started way back before 2018, but I tried to capture some of the dates that will stick out the most. In January of 2018, the South Broad District Study, which was a master plan done for the area, it was completed on January the 29th of 2018. That plan was then adopted as an official land use plan by the City Council in April of 2018. We held our press conference with both mayors, a joint press conference on site at the Wheeling Foundry site in early July of 22. And then we did our initial presentation to the City Council on July 19th, followed by a presentation to the County Commission on July 20th, a public hearing before the Hamilton County Industrial Development Board on July the 21st, a public hearing before the City of Chattanooga Industrial Development Board on August the 1st. And then TIF financing was eventually approved by the Hamilton County Commission on August 3rd, and then also approved by the City Council on August the 9th. This is a copy of the cover page of the South Broad District Study. This is the master plan that was done down in the South Broad area in partnership with the Chattanooga Design Studio that was supported by both the city and county. And this was completed in January of 2018. Part of what the plan focused on was this area called Southside Gardens, which is the area that you see on the map in front of you. And so this is a geographic area that was sort of south of I-24. It's east of I-24 and the river, and then north of Chattanooga Creek. And it sort of goes all the way from the river over to the campus of Howard High School. And so this is part of the illustrative plan that was adopted as part of the South Broad District Study. Some of the things that came out of the South Broad District Plan, which included meetings with over 200 constituents and lots of meetings down in the South Broad area, included the preservation and adaptive reuse of some of the historic foundry buildings on the former U.S. Pipe Wheeling Foundry site, making that site a retail and entertainment destination, and then really sort of encouraging a mix of uses and a mix of buildings to encourage pedestrian access and multimodal access on the site. These are some of the pages taken directly from the plan. As you can see, recommendation number 4 up there in the top left corner is exploring the creation of a TIF district. And you'll see the recommendation number 6. It's hopefully something that will be near and dear to Mrs. Varner's heart, is the support of Howard School. And then, as you can see over here on the right side, is to pursue catalytic projects on the U.S. Pipe and Wheeling Foundry site. And so the next page of the study goes on to talk about what some of those catalytic projects could look like. And there is the mention of a minor league baseball stadium as a potential catalytic project to jumpstart investment on the site. And really, that was sort of mentioned because it was something that was seen through the study and planning process as a method that other mid-sized cities were using to jumpstart and to catalyze areas of town that had been blighted or areas of town that were underutilized. And so the South Broad District Plan, which again had over 200 people participate, it was adopted as an official land use study by the City Council in April of 2018. And again, that study included making the reference to creating the TIF district and then potentially relocating the Lookout Stadium down to the South Broad area on the Wheeling site. So as we sort of got into this process, we began to really start to engage the South Chattanooga Neighborhood Association, which represents the Southside Gardens community. They also represent Alton Park under sort of one neighborhood association. And so we met early with the members. We started to have conversations with them both in person and virtually. And so we really started to hear, okay, like what are the concerns that you all have about this level of development coming to your area? And so what we sort of heard from them was, hey, this site has been blighted and has looked terrible for many, many years. We're thrilled about the potential for the redevelopment of the site, but what about Alton Park? What about areas of the city that have always been sort of historically neglected over time? Are there opportunities for Alton Park and some of these other neglected areas of the city to share in some of the prosperity that may come to the Southside Gardens community and to the Wheeling Foundry site? And so we thought about that, and I'll come back to that here in a moment. But then some of the other things that we heard was, concerns about just wanting to make sure that the removal of blight in urban communities was sort of kept as something that was extremely important, which is why a lot of folks had a lot of support for this project. But then also mitigating flooding issues, and then really sort of concerns about environmental justice. As you all know, the Wheeling Foundry site, just like much of Chattanooga, it's got foundry sand and will require some environmental remediation. Obviously, making sure that we remediate the property is something that's important to the residents, and obviously something that will be required as we sort of move through this process. And as part of that, one of the things that we did was, in recognizing that this is a former foundry site, the city initiated an application to the Environmental Protection Agency, and we were fortunate to be awarded $4.9 million for environmental remediation and environmental cleanup. That $4.9 million does not have to be used on this site, but we certainly listed this site as a potential opportunity for where environmental remediation would be needed to justify us pursuing the award. For those of you who are in development or construction, the need for dollars to do environmental remediation and to remediate foundry sand, that need is great and vast across our city, and certainly not isolated to the Wheeling Foundry and U.S. Pipe site. Just for reference, most people may not realize this, but Finley Stadium was actually built in an area that was a former foundry and former industrial site. And so foundry sand had to be removed and remediated to make way for Finley Stadium as well. But we were fortunate to have the Deputy Administrator of the EPA, Janet McCabe, who actually made a visit to Chattanooga. That actually was not last week. That was several weeks ago at this point. But she made a visit to Chattanooga to actually present us with the award for $4.9 million that we could use for remediation. So these are some of the additional community perspectives that we heard from the Neighborhood Association, and these are things that we think you're going to hear more of as we continue this process. Because sort of parallel to this process, we have community groups that are starting to meet to discuss a community benefits agreement, and so some of the things that we heard from the Neighborhood Association, we anticipate that those things will also be heard in community benefits agreement discussions. So there were concerns about increased traffic along Broad Street and Chestnut Street. People really wanted us to focus on a collaboration with Howard High School's Future Ready Institute. Howard has a Future Ready Institute that is focused on construction and architecture. We thought that it would be a great opportunity to have Howard students work with the master developer on construction and architecture opportunities. The preservation of affordable housing, but also mixed income housing and diversity, and then opportunities for contractor and diverse business participation. These are some of the things that we heard from the Neighborhood Association as we started to engage them on this project. And these are also going to be things that you hear is either in the press or informally from the community groups that are starting to participate in the community benefits discussions. This is the TIF district that we decided to create, which, as you can see, is larger than the initial footprint of the Southside Gardens community. And the reason that we created a TIF district that was larger is it allowed us to try to take the development and to take opportunities down Broad Street and really try to connect it to Alton Park. So the long, skinny parcel that looks sort of like a tail at the bottom of your map there is a parcel that the city owns that will be used to develop the Alton Park connector. The Alton Park connector is a proposed greenway that would basically be a branch that would come off of the Riverwalk, and the Alton Park connector would provide access to Southside Community Park, which is located at East 38th Street and Central Avenue, kind of in the middle of Alton Park. And so this was our way of sort of speaking to the Neighborhood Association's concern and interest about Alton Park not being included in terms of the future development. This, as any of us who have seen and watched Chattanooga develop over the years, we know the benefits and the economic advantages of seeing the Riverwalk develop. And so seeing greenways like this that can create connectivity is something that we think is going to be valuable and much needed. Not unlike the Beltline in Atlanta. The Beltline is also a multimodal pathway that just does a great big old loop right around the city of Atlanta. And you've seen tremendous economic growth along that multimodal pathway. That is exactly what we're hoping to see along the Alton Park Connector, as well as other stretches of the Riverwalk. And so as we started to think about this project, we really sort of started to think about this project and imagine it sort of in the context of all the other great public spaces that we've seen and invested in Chattanooga. So whether or not you're talking about the plaza, the Walnut Street Plaza, right in front of the Edwin Hotel and the Walnut Street Bridge, or the aquarium, or the renovated Miller Park, or the extension of West ML King Boulevard to the riverfront to Blue Goose Hollow. These are great public spaces that we've seen in Chattanooga. And so as we imagine and think about what a future stadium on the Wheel and Foundry US Pipe site could look like, we're imagining another beautiful public space that will be highly visible from the interstate and that will serve as a great entryway from the western portion of our city as you come around Moccasin Bend. And this is sort of where we got sort of our inspiration from. So we went, as part of this process, we went and visited Segra Park, which is in the city of Columbia, South Carolina, in their Bull District. They had an area that was much like the Wheel and Foundry US Pipe site, over 100 acres, former really underutilized site. There was an abandoned mental health institution that was there. The property was largely underutilized, and Segra Park was built for a AA minor league baseball team there as well. Jason Fryer of Hardball Capital, of course, this is the ownership group that owns the Chattanooga Lookouts. They also own the team that plays in this stadium, and this was a great example for us because what we saw there was examples of apartments coming up. So that you got the Live. Cap Gemini set up a new office building overlooking the stadium. So you've got the work aspect and the jobs being created. And then you have the stadium itself, which serves as a good anchor to attract all of the other investments. So you've got the opportunities for play. This stadium is also a multi-use stadium. It actually accommodates both baseball and football. And so you really have opportunities for entertainment that have come to Segra Park and the Bull District. Now, Columbia, at last count, was at $650 million of investment plan. And so there are more apartments, there's more retail, there's more office in the works in their Bull District. And this is exactly what we plan to see and what we want to see here in Chattanooga. That is what this has essentially been. So even though you guys are a sports authority, you guys are also, in many ways, an economic development engine, because this is what we care about the most as a city and county, is being able to grow our city and to grow prosperity and to grow revenue through increased development. And having the development that could be anchored and catalyzed by a new stadium is really what we have been primarily interested in. So we believe that the stadium could definitely be a catalyst. I've already talked about how it could be a source of new jobs, housing, and entertainment. The Lookouts would be the anchor tenant, and the creation of a sports venue was referenced in the South Broad District Plan that was adopted in 2018. So I'm going to ask my colleague Brent Goldberg to come back to talk about financing the stadium, and then I'll come back up here.
Thank you, Jermaine. Just a little anecdote before I go on. My deputy CFO is traveling to New England currently, and she sent me this the other day. It's a picture of her eating dinner on the terrace of her hotel, which overlooks the outfield of the ballpark there in New Hampshire, with a sign that says, while enjoying the patio dining, please be aware of objects leaving the ball field. And it's titled Hitting the Hilton. It's a Hilton hotel attached to the ball field. I thought that was, she said this reminded me of what it could be like in Chattanooga. So I'll get into financing the stadium. First, I want to say a special thank you to the state delegation. They did help us get a law passed in the legislature this last session that allows us to capture sales taxes that are generated within the stadium to pay the debt service on the stadium, which is an important part, as you will see. And you will see that we have a pretty competitive lease and parking fee structure with the Lookouts, and then the TIF district Jermaine's already mentioned. So this is kind of a summary on your screen. It shows that we will have 30-year Sports Authority bonds. It shows the sources of payment for the debt service, which is TIF, sales taxes, stadium lease, parking revenues, and then local support from the city and the county. All of the TIF and sales tax estimates that we use are provided by Younger Associates. They are a firm that we have used for several economic development projects over the years, and they do provide independent estimates for us to use. The Lookouts lease will start at $1 million per year with an escalator. That will be what comes to you for approval. One thing to note here is the Tennessee Titans pay, how much they pay, Jermaine? About $350,000 a year for leasing Nissan Stadium. And you may be aware that they also got about $500 million from state support for that stadium. So just as a comparison, this is a pretty expensive lease. We believe it's among the most expensive minor league leases in the country. The minor league team in Nashville, I believe, pays about $750,000 a year. And this is $1 million a year plus an escalator until they hit a certain point. Parking will be 100% debt service for 2 years. And then for the next 2 years, it will be 70% toward debt service. And then after that, 50% will go toward debt service. The difference would be retained by the lookouts. And then the city and the county would each put about $1.4 million into this project. This assumes $350 million of development within the TIF, which is extremely conservative. We think it'll certainly be at least $500 million. And over time, we believe it will get to $1 billion worth of development. So if we get past $350 million sooner than expected, the city and county would have to put less in. Just a little more details about the bond structure. So these are revenue bonds that would be issued by the Sports Authority, by you all, not general obligation bonds. These bonds are backed by identified revenues. They rely solely on the ability to pay, secured by the lease, the TIF revenues, parking revenues, and the sales taxes. There would be 2 tranches of bonds. We would have a taxable portion, and this would be because that portion of the debt would be serviced by the lease from the lookouts, which is private money. So these have to be taxable bonds. The annual debt service would be set up to match the lease payment, which averages just over $1 million over the life of the bond. And then the tax exempt portion would be serviced by all the other sources, all the public money sources. We still have to determine parking. It depends on if the parking is private or public parking, which one that will go into. So we will determine that, before we issue bonds. And then the average annual debt service on that portion would be about $3.6 million per year. So we're looking at average debt service over the life of the bonds around $4.6 million. There's very little fluctuation from year to year. We wanted it to be level payments over the 30 years to match the revenue streams. Of that $3.6 million, you can see $2.8 million would be covered by TIF increment, and that's only assuming $350 million in development occurs. So the more development we have, the more that TIF increment can be used for the debt service. Sales taxes would cover about $600,000, and then other sources would be about $200,000. And this shows that in terms of numbers, this kind of gives you a visual of what I just described. The bond proceeds required would be just under $80 million. That's obviously going to fluctuate a little bit based on interest cost and rates that are available at the time. But at the time this was prepared, we assumed capitalized interest would cost about just under $6.9 million, and bond issuance cost would be about $600,000. The amount for the stadium is $72 million. That amount will not change. That is the maximum amount that we are going to have to build a stadium. So we're going to figure out how to build a stadium for $72 million one way or another. Unless there's, developers around the stadium that want to contribute additional money above that. But we are not planning on that. We are planning to have $72 million available. And, whether it's value engineering, leaving off bells and whistles, whatever that is, or, we do see construction costs starting to stabilize a little bit. They perhaps will start going down some, especially as the Fed kicks us into a recession to get rid of some of the inflationary costs that we're seeing. So just under $80 million in bond proceeds. You can see the incremental property taxes would pay for 58% of the debt service on these bonds. These amounts are all in terms of today's dollars. So the present value is calculated using the bond discount rate. We just think it's simpler to show it this way because it's apples to apples. We're getting $80 million. We're paying back $80 million in terms of today's dollars. 22% of the stadium would be paid for by the lease. One thing we heard for several months was that the Lookouts were not putting any money into this project. The Lookouts are indeed paying for 22% of the stadium through a very expensive lease agreement. the Lookouts will also be responsible for maintenance of the stadium through the lease agreement, which is not reflected here. That's another $1.5 million a year that the Lookouts will have to pay to maintain the stadium for basic maintenance. So they will, over the life of the bonds, put in at least 30 million, which has got a present value of 17 million. They will put at least $30 million in for lease payments, plus another $45 million for maintenance, which is at least 75 million over 30 years. Sales taxes account for 14% when you combine state and local sales taxes. Parking revenues would cover 2%, and then the remaining 4% would be split between the city and the county, 1.4 million each. And this is a breakout of the estimated payment schedule for the city and county portion, just to show that this does not mean the city and county have to fork over $1.4 million tomorrow. This would be over time. The first payment wouldn't occur until fiscal year 25, and that would be the largest year. It would be about 800,000 each from the city and the county. And this assumes that we don't get development quicker than what we're estimating, right? And we're trying to be conservative as possible about what the development will look like and when it will occur. But we do believe by fiscal year 25, we'll have enough increment to where the city and county will only have to pay about an average of 40,000 for the next couple of years. And then when you look at fiscal years 30 through 40, that's an average of 39,000 per year from the city and county each. But that assumes that we never cross 350 million development, which I believe is unlikely. But we want to remain as conservative as possible. So that 1.4 million from the city and county would be spread out over 30 years or until it's not needed anymore because development crosses 350 million. One thing that we had gotten a request early on about was a cost benefit analysis. So based on $350 million in development, the city and county would each put 1.4 million in on the left side of your screen. On the right side, we kind of list out the benefits that we see from this project. One, there would be a new publicly owned regional asset in terms of the stadium, $80 million stadium. New revenues for general fund would be about $20 million. So the city and the county do retain some of the incremental property taxes from the TIF. The county receives 100% of the amount allocated for schools, and then they get a small portion for debt service. The city would also keep 25% of the increment for debt service. So that 20 million would come into general fund over the life of the bonds and the life of the TIF. New revenues for schools, 40 million over 30 years, and that's based on 350 million in development. If we get to $500 million in development, that amount is 55 million. So as development increases, there's new revenues that are generated for schools, and we make sure that the schools get 100% of what they would get, regardless of whether or not there's a TIF. New property tax base for the future would be $115 million just for the Wheeling site, Wheeling US Pipe site. That's not the entire TIF. That's just that 120 acres. The current assessed value for that site is $2 million. We expect the new assessed value once the TIF is built out to be 115 million. So that creates a future tax base that is pretty significant. And then we believe it's priceless to keep the Lookouts in Chattanooga. If we do not have a new stadium, we do not believe the Lookouts will be allowed to stay in Chattanooga because of all the compliance issues that we have with the current stadium. Younger provides us with a benefit cost ratio. So anything above 1 is good, anything below 1 is bad. The ratio for this project was established at 1.65, so that's a very good benefit cost ratio. I've touched on this, but new revenues for schools, of course, that's over 30 years. It's at least $1 million a year, a little over $1 million a year in new revenues for the schools that don't exist today. School board would determine what to do with that money. As development increases, that amount increases along with it. And then that's all I have. Do we want to do any questions? Do you have any financial related questions, or do you want us to get through and wrap this thing up?
I do have some general questions, but what isn't Jermaine finish up?
There's not much left.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So the opportunity for us is now we have a world-renowned master developer, Jim Irwin, who has been attracted to the project and who has worked with the owner of the Chattanooga Lookouts on the previous project that they did up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And then we also have Core Development, which is a developer of multifamily housing based in Nashville that has commitments of $170 million worth of development in the TIF district and on the site. Jim Irwin, as I said, is in addition to having been involved with the Fort Wayne project, he is also one of the designers and master developers for Atlanta's Ponce City Market, as well as the 14-acre Newhoff site in Nashville. And he really looks at the Wheeling Foundry U.S. Pipe and sees a tremendous amount of potential here to catalyze future development. This is a picture of Mr. Irwin. This is obviously Ponce City Market in Atlanta, which of course was an adaptive reuse project that used to actually be the former City Hall East in Atlanta and is now retail and shopping and mixed use and office space. This is what it looks like from the top. And so this is sort of some of the entertainment that goes on Ponce City Market on the rooftop. And then as I sort of mentioned just now, we also have the opportunity for a mix of housing options in the area. As I said, the core development from Nashville, they are already committed and partnering with the property owners to build multifamily housing on the site. We see this site and this project as being an opportunity for market rate, workforce, and affordable housing so that we can see a mix of incomes. This is sort of the footprint of the core site, which is really at the Wheeling Foundry trailhead of the Riverwalk. So for those people who are familiar with the intersection of St. Elmo Avenue and Middle Street, which is kind of behind the Taco Bell on Broad Street, that's the footprint in which they see their initial development right next to the Public Works Maintenance Facility. This is what, these are mock-ups and renderings of what some of the initial housing could look like in the first phase. And this is an additional rendering. And so what happens to AT&T Field and what happens to the City of Chattanooga Sports Authority that we currently have? So we currently do have the City of Chattanooga Sports Authority that oversees AT&T Field. AT&T Field, of course, is where the Lookouts currently play. We anticipate that the Lookouts will need to continue to play there at least until 2025. We are obviously hoping that we have construction complete and a new ball field ready for the season opener in 2025. So our current City of Chattanooga Sports Authority will continue to manage and oversee the Lookouts lease on AT&T Field, which they will need for the next couple of years. Part of the agreements that were worked out with the River City Company, which used to be an owner of the property where AT&T Field sits, is that the property would revert back to the ownership of River City, and that the Lookouts will be responsible for the demolition of AT&T Field once it's no longer used as a baseball stadium. And then Finley Stadium, of course, will also be will continue to operate it as a football field. This is an existing image of the current site. So some of you may have seen and may know and be familiar with this current site and what it looks like. So look at that image, and then if you see, this is what we hope this image can be. And so with that wraps up my presentation. We'll take any questions, and then I know we have the interlocal agreement that I think we'd like to get before you all and approved so that we can move on with the next steps.
Great. Well,
Okay, any questions at all from Jermaine before we go down?
Well, there's a lot of material provided before this, and I've read a lot of it, and I've also tried to read a lot on the town's website and read a lot of the press. So I have a number of questions. I don't want to keep people too long, but a couple of admin things. First of all, it'd be great to get a contact list of all of you, of all the staff,
Yes,
all members of the commission to circulate it amongst us. Which would be
Absolutely.
Great. In addition, you've mentioned this date of September 13th. I don't think I received an email. I don't know if you guys had yet.
Okay.
So the last time we did scheduling, we did a scheduling poll,
Okay.
which helped everyone kind of choose a date that would work. I could make the 13th work, but I'm traveling that day.
Okay.
And then it would also be great if we could schedule out into the future as much as possible, even dates that we have to give up if there's nothing to discuss. But if we could hold those in our calendar, it'd be easier for us to block our calendar on those.
Okay. Very good. We can do that. And we'll work with Maria through the attorney's office.
Yeah, just kind of three very general questions, I'd say, from reading through the material. One, on environmental remediation, do you have an estimate at all of what that might be? I know you'll need to dig into it and find out, and you won't really know. There's a $4.9 million EPA grant. Are there bounded estimates of how large or how small that could be? And if it goes beyond the resources of that grant, how will that be funded?
Yeah, so some of that could be funded potentially through the bonds, because the bonds that you float will also obviously allow us to do some initial site work as well. We had initially estimated back when we approached the state delegation of costs that would be closer to $7.3 million for the entire environmental remediation. That may change though, because as we start to focus in on where exactly the stadium will be located, and how much acreage it will take up on the site, those costs could go one way or the other. But we had initially thought that the cost would be somewhere around 7.3 million. But again, now that we've sort of focused more on where we think the stadium will be relative to that property, those estimates could go up or down. Yeah.
And the mayor in his remarks mentioned the community benefit agreement. You also mentioned in your remarks, could you give us an update on where we stand with that, particularly given the timeline we're trying to pursue, and what the steps need to be taken to approve a community benefit agreement, and who that is negotiated between?
The community benefits agreement will be negotiated between the neighborhood groups and the potential property owners, as well as the baseball team and the master developer. So that agreement will be sort of a bilateral discussion that will happen between those two parties. The community groups had their second formal meeting last night, actually here in this room. There was a significant turnout, lots of great discussion, lots of great ideas that came from the community members. And so they will be sort of working on that path kind of separately. And you know, our message to the community members has been, we, the city, county, obviously want to be as supportive as possible of the process, but a community benefits agreement is traditionally negotiated between the community groups and the owners of the team and the property owners. But I anticipate that we will have sort of a formal negotiating group that will represent the community members within the coming weeks, and I anticipate that those conversations will continue to take place.
Great. Any other questions from any members? Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I guess on the scheduling list on here, the 13th is on a Tuesday. That's the reason we're putting that down. And it's at the same time, 11. I'm just trying to figure out, would it be better to do Tuesdays, or what day of the week works better for you guys? We'll have to try to work with the city council about meeting times. 11 o'clock work for the 13th.
Well, can we all up here do will that work, the 13th? We can agree to that perhaps, and then try to get some other dates more planned out in the future through a polling process.
Yeah.
Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So why don't we plan on the 13th
Okay.
at 11 o'clock for the next meeting, and then try to get some future meetings on the books through the polling process? That would be really helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Just
you.
let us know which days of the weeks work better for you in that regard.
Well, what they did before, Phil, is she actually sent around a poll offering a series of dates, and we told her which ones we were available for, and then she could choose meetings around that.
Okay.
So it's kind of the same idea, but the other way around.
We'll get her to send you a list till the end of the year and we'll try to work from there.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right, sir.
And then just one final question, sorry. The mayor mentioned 170 million of identified investment already, and you're basing your modeling, your assumptions on 350 million.
That's
Can
correct.
you just give us a very brief sense of that 170 identified, because that should be pretty specific at this point. And then beyond that, in general terms, the other 175, 180, it'll take us to 350.
Sure. So the multifamily housing that I mentioned from Core Development in the slides, Core Development has the ability to and has committed and plans to do $170 million worth of investment on properties around the Wheeling Foundry Trailhead. That's in the TIF district. So that's the initial $170 million that we've identified through their development. That will all be multifamily housing and some mixed-use retail. And then in terms of the additional path to $350 million, so Jim Irwin, the master developer, has a finance team led by a gentleman named McKittrick Simmons, and they are working to put together an investment portfolio to attract the rest of the capital that will be needed to catalyze development on the site. In a previous meeting, Mr. Simmons had identified that they had already put together a fund of approximately $650 million of investment for investment that would happen on the site if a stadium was built on the site. And so that is their interest, is being able to see and to realize a certain level of investment and a certain level of density that they really feel would be catalyzed and tied to the existence of a stadium. So they feel very strongly and passionately about the development of the stadium as a means to catalyze the additional investment.
Add one thing to that. And just to add on to that point, the reason that I used 350 million in the projections is because we knew the 170 was there. We simply roughly doubled that amount to be very conservative. We've run, I've run it at 400, 450, 500, all different numbers, but 350 was the most conservative. Once we get to about 410, 450 million, it's break even without any city or county money whatsoever.
Just one final thing for me. I'm sorry to occupy so much time, but we're not reinventing the wheel here. As you all said, a number of stadiums have been built and many sports authorities have been set up. I think it'd really be helpful for all of us to get material on lessons learned, best practices, what has gone right, what has gone wrong, information on Knoxville, because we're starting this afresh. None of us have ever done anything like this, but there should be a lot of information out there. And then finally, you presented the cost benefit analysis, which is interesting. It'd be interesting to see 5, 10, 15 years on the assumed cost benefit analysis for the city and what actually was realized, because we're basing that on estimates now. And it'd be nice to see how that has played out in places like Fort Wayne, where you're now 10 years into that.
Mm-hmm.
But information on that of an informal nature, it might be helpful for us to have education sessions from the staff to present best practices, to learn a lot more about our jobs, because many, many people around the country have done this over the last 10 or 15 years, and we can learn from that.
We can do that, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, going down your list, at the next point here, item number 10, I guess you can decide whether you would like Mr. Noblet as your legal counsel or someone else on here. I do know a little bit about it at this point in time, and I'm learning as we go each week here. So I'll be glad to try to keep you in order in that regard if you wish.
Great, we'd like to introduce a motion to have Phil Noblet serve as legal counsel to the Sports Authority. So, all in favor?
All right, we're official. Good.
Good.
The last but not least item other than other business, I think, on here, on this list is the interlocal cooperative agreement on the multi-use stadium. And as Jermaine mentioned, this agreement has already been signed by both the city and the county at this point in time. And this is the multi-use stadium project agreement that I believe needs to be signed off on last by this body after your creation. So it is a three-party agreement. Currently, it's already been signed by the mayor for Hamilton County and the mayor for the city of Chattanooga, and that is the remaining item. And Bart, you want to tell a little bit about that?
This agreement, so you were asked about best practices, which I thought was a really great question. And one quick comment, if you don't mind me going a quick aside, is our lease in Knoxville is the first lease under the new MLB. You know, they totally restructured the minor league system. And so they're treating minor league teams much more like McDonald's franchises now. And MLB is taking a much more proactive role. So they've actually, ours is the first lease that has gone through their approval system. And so they have signed off on it. Obviously, your owner wants to basically take our lease. Jason wants to use a lease, and I think the city obviously would as well to save time and effort and basically plagiarize it. The terms should be very much the same. You'd be surprised. You know, the stadiums in Tennessee, the Sounds is the last one before that, and it is already sort of dated, but the structure is very similar to the Sports Authority. The agreement that you're being asked to vote on is really derived from the Titan Stadium the first time back in about 2000, when we actually drafted the legislation that allowed Metro government to essentially constitutionally backstop the Titan Stadium. This statute, the Sports Authority statute, was created. This mechanism was created to comply with certain constitutional requirements that you cannot use the taxing power, as Brent said, of the city of Chattanooga or Hamilton County to pay that. In other words, if there's a shortfall, the city and the county can't raise property taxes to do that. They will agree to use other non-property tax revenues to make up any shortfalls. This is the agreement that accomplishes it. It is what makes this a financeable transaction, and it's why it's such an important agreement. And we wanted to get that in front of you all first so that we can start moving forward and know that we've got this agreement in place. And so that's why this is the first significant agreement on your agenda. I've actually, and going back to I've been collecting leases. The most recent Southern League lease was Madison, Alabama, which is outside of Huntsville. So if you would like me to, I'll be glad to share. I've been collecting. I've been amazed how there's not cookie cutters. That you know, our leases that I've been working on was sort of a amalgamation of what I hope were good ideas from a lot of different leases. And so it's been a really, I learned a lot more about AA baseball than I thought I ever would. So it's interesting. So, and a funny story I always like to tell is that Jackson lost their AA team in Jackson, Tennessee, lost their thing, but their stadium, when we first financed it probably 20 years ago, $6 million. And so you all saw how much it cost to build a AA stadium now. So times have changed.
So this agreement has already been signed by the city and county. I guess the important portion of all this is that they are backstopping the bonds in connection with this matter. It's not just this entity on here, but this would authorize the approval of an amount not to exceed $80 million in bonds here. And that will be coming for you at some point in the future here for the first issuance of bonds by this authority. But right now, the agreement here is simply making provisions that this matter would be a limitation of liability. And one thing that's important on paragraph 18 of this document is that it limits liability, and there's no recourse against any individual that is on this board here in connection with this item. So that's something I think is always important to bring to your attention.
Good, then I motion to authorize the approval of the interlocal cooperative agreement.
Second.
All in favor? Great.
So at this point, these items are all approved unless you've got other business that needs to come before you. At this point, that will be your first meeting. And it looks like we've got an agreement for the 13th of September at 11 a.m. at the next meeting. And we'll get out the listing to you at other times so y'all can select them.
Thank you for your help.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
I just wanted to mention, on behalf of Mayor Kelly and Mayor Coppinger, we appreciate the fact that you all were willing to serve. We know that this is a new experience for you, but this is an important project, obviously, to both mayors, and we thank you for the service and the willingness to serve the community and to be a part of this. And then I think Mr. Goldberg had one thing that he just wanted to mention as a final housekeeping note, and I think that's it.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Jermaine said. Thank you very much for serving. I think this is an important day for Chattanooga and Hamilton County overall. I think, people are going to look back 20, 30 years from now and say, I'm really glad we built that stadium and did this for Chattanooga and for Hamilton County. One thing I wanted to mention, though, as as we build out your meeting schedule, whether it's the next meeting or one shortly after that, we will provide some recommendations to the board for retaining bond counsel. We will be recommending Mark Mamontoff. And then also financial advisor that the Sports Authority will need to hire. The city and the county both use the same public financial advisor, and we will provide information to you on that as well. But those are two things that will be important for you all to hire independently from the city and the county, both bond counsel and a financial advisor. So we will provide recommendations and information to you all, certainly in time for you to review everything before that comes up for a vote. I just wanted to mention that to get it on your radar.
Great. Thank y'all very much.
Meeting adjourned. Good. We will need to get a couple of these resolutions signed by.
Yeah, because right here, and then,
Yeah, we can.